The sky was red like it had bled for centuries, and the ground was broken from the weight of war, and Eli Ward, a human soldier with dirt on his face and sorrow in his eyes, moved through the ruins alone with a rifle in one hand and a torn flag in the other. He was not supposed to survive the mission, but somehow he did. The peace talks had failed, explosions had ripped through the sky, and now the only thing alive around him was silence and smoke. The world he walked on once had a name, but now even the stars above seemed to forget. Eve limped through the ash and dust, searching for something, anything, maybe shelter, maybe water, maybe just a reason to keep breathing. Every step echoed with memories of lost comrades, of screams, and of things that never should have happened. And then he saw it, a structure made of dark stone, half buried in rubble. Something old, something sacred. It called to him, not with words, but with weight, as if history itself waited inside. He pushed open a broken door and stepped into the shadows. The air was cold, and the walls were covered in strange alien symbols, glowing faint blue, like veins of ancient power, and in the center of the room stood a statue. A warrior carved in silver stone, holding a blade, so real it almost breathed, and in front of it stood a figure, small, silent, watching him. I was tall for her kind, with silver skin, and eyes like twin moons, and long hair braided with metal bands. Her armor was cracked, and her hands were wrapped in dried blood, but her voice when she spoke was soft and heavy like rain after fire. You are not one of us, she said, and yet you are here with the sword, watching you. Eli raised his weapon, but she did not flinch. She only stepped aside, revealing what lay behind her, a blade resting on a stone, a real sword, not part of the statue, not rusted or broken, but clean, glowing, humming with something deep, something alive. My father died with this blade in his hand, she said, and he told me before he fell that the one worthy of carrying his name would not be born of this world. He said the one to hold the blade next would be human, and that I would know him when I saw him. Mealy laughed, but there was no joy in it, just disbelief and exhaustion, and a heart too broken to hold hope. I'm no hero, he said. I'm just the last one left. That is enough, she whispered, and she stepped forward with the sword in her hands, and he saw her eyes fill with something more than sadness, something more than fear. It was trust, pure and raw and terrifying. The moment his fingers touched the hilt, the room trembled, and the blade lit up with fire that was not fire, with light that was not light, and the alien girl took a step back, and the statue behind her cracked open down the middle, revealing a spiral stair, going down into the dark. Eli stared at the stairs, then at her, and then at the sword in his hand. What is this place? He asked. It is a test, she said, or maybe a grave. It is where my father fell, and where you may rise or vanish. Why me? He asked again. Because my people no longer listen to voices like mine, she said, and because the blade chose you before I did. Outside thunder rolled, but there was no rain, only the sound of ships returning to finish what they started, and somewhere above them the armies of her kind were regrouping, waiting for orders to burn everything left behind. You can run now, she said, or you can go down and learn why my father trusted someone he never met, someone like you. You, she asked, do you trust me? Eli looked at her, then at the sword, then at the dark stairway, and finally at the broken sky beyond the door. I don't know, he said, but I'm too tired to care, and too stubborn to die. And he walked forward, not as a soldier, not as a survivor, but as something else, something new, with the blade in his hand, and a strange warmth in his chest, and a girl with alien eyes walking behind him in silence, and above them the wall watched and waited, as if it too held its breath for what would come next. The stairs beneath the statue spiraled deep into the heart of the ancient temple, where time itself felt heavy, and the air whispered with forgotten voices. Eli stepped carefully, each footfall stirring dust that had not moved in ages. The sword in his hand glowed faintly, casting shadows that danced along the cracked stone walls behind him. Zilla followed close, her eyes watching the blade more than the path ahead, as if expecting it to change or betray him. At any moment, as they reached the bottom, a large chamber opened before them, shaped like a circle with carvings across the walls depicting warriors, strange beasts, and stars, aligned in constellations. Eli could not recognize. In the center stood a platform made of black stone, with a single pedestal in the middle. Atop it was nothing, empty, like something had once belonged there, and was now missing, or perhaps waiting to return. This place was a sanctum, Zilla said, her voice soft and steady. It was built by the ancients to protect the bloodline of the blade, and to test the worth of any who dared claim it. Not all who entered this room walked out, and none who entered were ever human. El looked at the walls, then at her, and then back to the blade in his hand. It still hummed with quiet energy, as if aware of its surroundings, and restless in his grip. He felt a strange pull from the pedestal, like a magnet drawing him forward, but his feet remained Still, what happens if I fail? He asked, his voice low and sure. Then the blade will reject you, she said, and the sanctum will decide your fate, and mine too, because I brought you here because I believed in what my father said, even when my people called him Madalai. Step toward the pedestal, and place the sword upon it. The stone rippled like water, and the carvings on the walls lit up, pulsing with light. The chamber began to shift with grinding sounds as hidden mechanisms moved, ancient gears turning, and doors slowly opening, revealing paths carved into the stone, leading in different directions. Choose one, Zilla said. Each path is different, each path is alive, only one will accept you. How will I know? He asked. The blade will tell you, she answered. If it dims, the path is false. If it glows, the path is yours. But once you enter, you cannot turn back. The sanctum watches, and it remembers the lie. Picked up the sword again, and turned toward the first path, but the blade dimmed. He tried the second, the same, then the third, and suddenly the blade pulsed brighter than before. It's glow warm and strong, this one, he said, and without waiting for a reply, stepped inside the corridor, narrowed with walls, etched in scenes of past battles. Warriors falling and rising and falling again, until the stories blurred together. Footsteps echoed louder here, like the stone listened and judged with every step ahead. A door blocked his path, tall and sealed with a symbol carved into its surface. A circle within a triangle, within a star. He raised the sword and touched it to the door, and it opened slowly, revealing a chamber lit by floating crystals that pulsed with light in rhythm with his heart. A figure stood in the middle. A projection of some kind made of light and memory. It looked like Zilla, but older, with eyes like fire and presence like a storm. It spoke not in words, but through thought, filling his mind with images of battle, death, honor, and sacrifice. You are not of our blood, the voice said. You are not of our kind, and yet you hold what we hold dear. Explain. We did not know how to answer. He simply raised the blade and thought of his friends who died, the peace that never came, the hope that still burned in small, quiet places, and the promise he made to himself to try again, even when it hurt. The projection watched him, then stepped forward, its hand brushing his shoulder, not with touch, but with energy, and suddenly memories flooded his mind. Zilla's father, standing with the blade at the gates of war, refusing to bow even when betrayed, then passing the sword to an unseen figure bathed in human light. The chamber shook, and the projection vanished, and the crystals dimmed, and the sword in his hand grew hot, then cold, then calm. The trial was over, and he was still standing. The door behind him closed, and a new path opened before him. Zilla waited on the other side, her eyes searching his face for signs of failure or pain, but he simply nodded, and she exhaled for the first time in minutes. The blade accepted you, she said, as if trying to believe it herself. No human has ever made it this far. Then maybe your father was right, Eli said, and maybe this war does not need more warriors. Maybe it needs someone who still believes in impossible things. Zilla smiled just a little, but behind her smile was fear, because the deeper they went, the more dangerous it would become, and outside the temple, her people would never forgive her for what she had done. Eli looked at the blade, then at her, then toward the next dark tunnel ahead, and he stepped forward again, the blade glowing brighter with every step, as if ready for the storm that waited beyond. The tunnel ahead twisted like a serpent carved through stone and sorrow, and the deeper Eli moved, the heavier the air became, thick with age and something else, something that watched from the shadows with eyes unseen. The sword in his hand pulsed like a heartbeat, echoing through his palm, guiding him, yet warning him with every step behind him. Zilla said nothing, but her breath quickened with each turn, as if she remembered something the walls wanted her to forget. At the end of the passage stood a wide chamber, filled with columns and light shafts from above, where the sun should not reach, and in the center a circle was carved into the floor, dark as obsidian with old bloodstains, dried and cracked, a symbol of judgment and sacrifice. Across the far side sat a figure robed in silver armor, covered in dust and silence, its face hidden by a mask shaped like a beast, with sharp teeth and hollow eyes, and it moved only when Eli stepped into the circle. The trial keeper, Zilla whispered, her voice trembling. It lives only for the test. It knows nothing of mercy or lies. It is older than my father, and will outlive my people. It remembers every challenger and forgets none of them. The masked figure raised its hand, and the room shifted. The pillars folded inward, the light vanished, and in its place emerged illusions, not empty tricks but living echoes of warriors who had taken the trial before alien champions from centuries past, and among them human figures, too strange and impossible. Yet their forms flickered with pain. None had succeeded, none had survived. The blade in Eli's grip vibrated more fiercely now, as if recognizing what lay ahead. The keeper finally spoke, a voice that echoed through stone and bone, one tongue many. He is all who claim the blood blade must face the truth of their soul strength. Alone is not enough, only the fire within may unlock the path forward. Step into the circle, bearer of doubt. Show what lies behind your eyes. Ellie moved without a word, stepping into the circle as the illusions began to close in, not as shadows, but as warriors. Fully formed weapons, raised eyes. Full of fury, the first came fast, a creature with 4 arms and a whip of plasma striking at Eli's head, but the sword met it with a flash of heat that cracked the stone underfoot. The second came from behind, a twin-blade assassin that moved like smoke, but Eli ducked just in time, letting the blade hum through air, as if warning him he fought not with skill but with instinct. Every motion powered by a will not to win, but to survive and protect something bigger than himself, each strike more desperate, more wild, but the blade did not fail. It answered him each time like an extension of his own fear, his own hope, and in that chaos, the trial keeper watched with silent judgment, still stood frozen. Just outside the circle, her eyes locked on Eli, but also on something behind the keeper. A faint shimmer in the wall, a sigil glowing in rhythm with the sword, something her father once spoke of, a hidden mark that only appeared when the right one fought, not for glory, but for something real. She dared not speak as Eli spun, dodged, struck, and bled. The illusions vanished one by one, until only one remained. A final echo stepped forward, this one wearing armor black as midnight, eyes glowing with fire, and when Eli raised the blade to defend it, did not strike him. Instead, it spoke in a voice that mirrored his own, and asked, "Why do you fight, human? Why take the blade? Why walk a path that ends in pain?" And Fire Lee gritted his teeth, sweat and blood dripping down his face, and he said, "Not for me, not for power. I fight so others don't have to bleed anymore. I fight because she believed in me, and because your silence has lasted too long." The final echo nodded slowly, then raised its weapon, and the chamber shook with thunder and light. When they clashed, not with strength but with meaning, not with rage but with truth, and when Eli struck the final blow, the figure faded into dust and the circle glowed beneath his feet, with ancient script that Zilla recognized as words from her ancestors. He is chosen not by birth, but by heart. The trial keeper stepped aside for the first time in centuries, its mask cracking down the middle, as if something long hidden had finally found peace, and the pillars moved again, creating a new path ahead, glowing with warmth, not from fire, but from acceptance. Zilla rushed forward, her hand touching Eli's arm, and he nearly collapsed. But still he stood with the blade now silent, as if the fight had calmed its soul. She looked into his eyes and saw something new, not just determination, but understanding, something that could never be taught, only earned through fire. "You face the blood of my people, and the doubt of your own," she said, "and still you did not fall. Now the sword knows your name, and so do I." Eli did not answer with words, only with a nod, and a breath that felt like waking from a long dark dream. The path ahead opened wide and filled with golden light, but beyond it, they both knew, waited more than just war, more than pain. Ahead waited the truth Zilla feared, and the reason her father trusted, a man not born of stars, but of earth and fire and grief. The golden light led them into a chamber, unlike the others, quiet and warm, with walls made of crystal and air that pulsed like a heartbeat, slow and steady, with energy that felt ancient and alive. Eli stepped carefully, his boots making no sound, on the smooth floor, and the sword in his hand hummed with low vibrations, like it was remembering something buried deep inside its core. Zilla followed closer, eyes scanning the carvings along the walls, each one telling a story not just of battles, but of choices, sacrifices, betrayals, and hope, shattered, then reborn. In the center of the room stood a tall obelisk, covered in thin glowing lines that shifted like water. When Eli approached, the light responded, wrapping around his hand and spreading across the sword like it recognized him, like it welcomed him. And then, without warning, the obelisk spoke, not with words, but with images, memories flowing into the room like smoke, filling the space with visions of a man standing on a battlefield. His armor cracked, his face covered in dirt and tears, and in his hands the same sword, now glowing with fire, as he fought against his own kind, to protect something unseen. Zilla stepped forward, gasping as the image focused, revealing the warrior's face, and in that moment her voice cracked. "That's my father," she whispered. "The last time I saw him, he was bleeding and smiling, and he told me to run. Now he speaks again, not with his voice, but with his soul." The memory of her father turned and looked directly at Eli, though it was just an echo, and yet it felt real and heavy and true, and his voice filled the room, not as a sound, but a presence, strong and calm, and burdened with truths that had waited too long to be heard. "If you are holding this blade, then you are not one of us, and that is exactly why you must listen. I fought not because I wanted to destroy, but because I believed someone would come, someone who had nothing to gain and everything to lose, someone who would bleed for others, Without expecting to be remembered, I hoped it would be my daughter, but fate chose differently, and I trust it even now. In death, Zilla closed her eyes, trying to hold back tears, as her father's words continued weaving stories of leaders who lied, of brothers who turned to enemies, and of a vision he held close, a future where alien and human stood side by side, not with weapons, but with understanding, and the sword in his hand was never meant to win wars, it was meant to end. Eli stood, still letting the truth settle inside his chest, like fire and ice clashing. He thought of his own past, his own leaders who sent him into battles with no meaning, of friends lost for nothing, of orders followed because there was no choice, and he realized now that this sword, this moment, this girl beside him, were all part of something bigger than pain, bigger than victory. This was about healing wounds. No one dared touch them. Obelisk dimmed, and the vision faded, and silence returned, but not the empty silence from before now. It was filled with memory and connection and purpose. And when Zilla looked at Eli, she did not see a human anymore. She saw the answer her father had waited for. The path forward now opened with a soft hum, revealing stairs leading upward toward the surface, and she knew that what waited above would not be kind. They climbed in silence until they reached a broken platform that overlooked a burning valley, and in the distance, ships moved like shadows across the sky, and among them one flew the banner of her people, not a flag of peace but a symbol of domination and control, and leading them was Reichel, her cousin, her enemy, and once her closest friend. He will never accept you, she said, not because you are human but because you are not weak. He fears what he cannot control, and he will strike first, without words, without warning. Then let him try, Eli replied, and his grip on the sword tightened, not with anger but with readiness, and his eyes stared at the army below, with the calm of someone who had nothing left to fear. Zilla turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. If you fall, I lose everything again. If you die, this hope dies with you, and I cannot lose it. Not again. Then stay close, he said, and don't let go, not until it's over, not until they see what we are fighting for. Above them, thunder cracked and light fell from the clouds like spears, and the war that had never truly ended began to awaken again. But this time the blade in Eli's hand burned not for blood but for truth, and the ghosts of her father's war finally had a voice, and it spoke through the courage of a human who never asked to be chosen, but stood tall when no one else could. The sky above roared, as if the heavens themselves had grown angry, and below the valley trembled with the stomping boots of soldiers. Not human but alien, all wearing the silver and black crest of Reichel, the prince who once shared childhood laughter with Zilla and now marched toward her with fire in his heart and vengeance in his eyes. Eli stood beside her on the cracked stone ridge above the field, blade in hand, watching the swarm of troops moving like waves through smoke and broken trees. His breath steady, his thoughts sharp, the sword in his grip began to glow again, not from heat, but from purpose. Zilla said nothing as she stepped forward, her cloak snapping in the wind, her voice rising above the thunder, like a clear bell that refused to break. And when the front line of soldiers saw her, they hesitated, unsure whether to raise their weapons or bow to blood. But behind them strode Reichel, tall, proud, and wrapped in gold-lined armor, his face hidden behind a war mask shaped like a hawk, his voice cold when he removed it, and said, "Traitor sister, why do you stand with a beast? Why do you disgrace our father's name?" Zilla's voice did not shake when she answered, "You speak of honor, yet you burn villages and silence those who dream. You wear a crown forged from fear and call it leadership. My father gave his life for peace. You give your life to Reichel." Laughter sounded like shattered glass and pointed at Eli. "And what is that thing you bring before me? A human with a stolen blade, a puppet in your fantasy. He is nothing, and soon he will be ashes. Then test him," Zilla said. "Step forward, and face the man you call nothing, and let the blade decide what he is." Reichel stepped back and raised his arm, and from the crowd came his champion, a brute twice Eli's size, with armor fused to his skin, and eyes glowing like twin stars. The beast held a hammer made from meteor stone, and every step shook the ground. Eli stepped forward, sword pulsing bright and silent. The world seemed to hold its breath as the two warriors stood face to face. The champion struck first, a downward swing meant to end the fight before it began, but Eli rolled aside faster than expected, the blade singing through air and slicing into the brute's side. Sparks flew, but no blood, only metal and rage. The champion turned, swinging again with fury, not skill, and Eli danced between the strikes, each move guided by instinct and the memory buried in the blade. Zilla watched from the edge, her hands clenched, her heart pounding, not because she feared defeat, but because she feared what would happen when Eli won. Reichel would not accept it. He would not retreat, and blood would spill no matter who stood last. The brute charged again, this time Faster, more wild, but Eli met him in the center, steel against stone, sparks lighting the sky, and in a flash the champion fell, the sword deep in his chest. The glow now a blaze of white, the crowd fell silent. Trickle's face twisted with rage and disbelief, and he stepped forward, sword drawn, not waiting for orders or reason. Zilla moved to intercept, but Eli raised a hand, stopping her, not with words but with a look. He stepped to face the prince, the final test. The final threat who should not exist. Rak hissed, "You should not stand, you should not speak. The blade is a lie, and you are its curse." Lai raised the sword, his voice calm, "Then proveth a duel. Began with no warning, just motion, and fury. Reichel was trained, bred for war, his strikes precise, cruel, filled with the pride of someone who believed he could not lose. But Eli was something different, not perfect, not graceful, but relentless. Each block, each counter was a promise made to the dead, and to the living, to Zilla and to her father, to the blade, and to the boy inside him, who still believed peace was worth bleeding. Forsteel clashed again and again, until the sky turned red, and both warriors stood in blood and breath and dust, and then in one final move, Eli let the blade fall. In a slow arc, not fast, not wild, but true, and Reichel stumbled backward, the crown falling from his head. The army did not charge, they did not scream, they only watched as Eli stood over their prince, not with hatred, but with sorrow, the sword lowered. The battle over. Zilla walked to him, and placed a hand on his shoulder, and together they looked at the soldiers below, who now waited not for orders but for something more than. "Let them see," Eli whispered. "Let them see what a human can be, when someone believes." And the blade in his hand began to dim, not in weakness but in peace, as the war paused for the first time in generations, and the betrayer's crown lay forgotten in the dirt. The silence that followed the fall of the crown was not peace, it was the sharp pause before the storm. The army stared not in fear but in confusion, caught between loyalty to a fallen prince and awe of a stranger who should not have survived. Zilla stood tall beside Eli, her gaze sweeping over the soldiers, her voice calm but heavy. When she spoke, "Do not follow the crown, follow the truth, and let your blades rest for one moment, and listen to the will of something older than us." All the soldiers shifted uncertain, some lowered their weapons, others looked to the skies above where storm clouds gathered and deep thunder rumbled from the heavens. But it was not thunder, not natural, not weather, it was the sound of engines, massive and hungry, and growing louder with each breath. Zilla's eyes widened in horror, and she whispered, "No, not this, not now." The sky cracked open as dark shapes descended from orbit, sleek warships with no banner, no tribe, and no mercy. Her voice trembled when she said, "The Purge fleet. They have come to cleanse the dishonored. The elders must have activated it when they sensed the crown fall. They believe our world has been corrupted, and now they will erase everything." Eli stepped forward, his eyes locked on the descending ships, the sword in his hand, glowing again, not with fire, but with something deeper, memory, instinct, legacy. He turned to Zilla and asked, "What do we do?" She answered with pain in her voice, "We cannot stop them, not from the ground. Once they begin their cycle, they do not stop, not for signals, not for mercy. They will burn the entire valley, then move outward, until nothing remains. Then we go up," Eli said, and she looked at him, as if he had lost his mind. "How?" she asked. "With what? With who?" "With this," he said, lifting the blade, "and with whatever strength we have left, and with whoever still remembers what your father fought for." He turned to the soldiers below, and raised the sword high, not as a threat, but as a promise, and he shouted, not like a commander, but like a brother, "I am not your prince, I am not your blood, but I hold the blade your people feared and your ancestors trusted. If you follow me, we fight for more than land or pride. We fight for the right to choose who we become, and if we fall, then let it be with honor, not silence." There was a pause, then a voice rose from the crowd. Then another, then a dozen more, until the army roared as one, not for a crown, but for truth. They gathered around Zilla and Eli, and from the wreckage pulled old tech, ancient flyers, salvaged cannons, mobile launch platforms forgotten, but functional, and in the center of it all stood an ancient gate. A transport ring, powered by energy cells, locked away beneath the temple. "We send a team through," Zilla said, "straight to the core of the lead ship. If we disable the command hub, the fleet will collapse into confusion, long enough to force them to retreat." Eli nodded and stepped onto the platform, followed by Zilla and 5 warriors sworn to her father's vision. As the gate charged, the blade in Eli's hand pulsed once more, and the platform exploded in light. They emerged in chaos. Alarms blaring inside the command ship, metal walls glowing red with warning lights, drones rushing through the halls. Zilla led the way, moving with purpose through the maze, her fingers dancing across panels, triggering doors, and sealing others behind the mule. Moved like a shadow, not hesitating, not doubting each step, guided by something more than training the blade, leading him with each pulse, warning him of danger before it came. They reached the core, a towering pillar of energy that hummed like a living heart, wrapped in armor and guarded by machines programmed to destroy. The warriors fought with skill, Zilla with fury, but Eli moved differently. The blade sang in his hand like it remembered every strike it had ever made, every life it had ever spared or taken. He fought not as a man, but as something the ship could not understand, a force of will shaped by loss and rebuilt through belief. He reached the pillar and plunged the sword into its heartlight. Burst outward, and the ship trembled, and the machines fell still. The command signals went dark, and across the sky the other ships began to drift, uncertain, leaderless. The purge was undone, not by power, but by a single act of courage. The team returned through the gate just as the ships began to scatter, and in the valley below, the people looked up and saw the sky clearing, not just of smoke, but of centuries of fear. Zilla stood beside Eli, and the warriors kneeled, not because of blood, but because of truth. And in that moment, Eli did not feel like a stranger or a savior. He felt like someone who had been forged by the same fire that once lit her father's eyes. And when the people asked what now, Zilla answered with no crown on her head and no blade in her hand. We build, not walls, not armies, not lies. We build something new, and we remember who showed us how to begin again. The valley, once scorched by fire, now breathed with quiet, the soil still blackened, but healing under soft rain that had not fallen in years. The warships had vanished, the sky was no longer a battlefield, and the people who remained stepped carefully, as if afraid the peace might break if touched too hard. Eli stood at the edge of the temple ruins, the sword resting beside him in the dirt, its glow now silent, its duty complete. Zilla approached from behind her boots, sinking into the wet earth, her eyes filled with memories not yet spoken, and when she stood beside him she said nothing, only stared at the blade that had changed everything around them. Workers moved stone, rebuilt shelters, tended to the wounded, but they did it not as servants of a crown, not as soldiers of a banner, but as people united by something older than war. The story of a human who carried an alien's blade and refused to let it become a symbol of conquest again. Eli bent down and picked up the sword. Its weight felt different now, not heavy, not demanding, but still sacred. He turned to Zilla and asked, "What now?" Not because he needed instruction, but because he wanted to hear her dream. She answered slowly, as if tasting the future on her tongue. "We teach not how to fight, but why we once did. We write the truth into stone, so it cannot be twisted by power, and we protect the next ones, the children who will carry stories, not wounds, and we honor the blade by not using it, unless there is no other way." Eli looked out at the valley, and then to the horizon, where a new sunrise painted the mountains gold, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he had finally come home, not to a place, but to a purpose. Zilla held out her hand, and he gave her the sword, not because he wanted to be free of it, but because it belonged to more than him. Now she held it with both hands, and whispered something in her native tongue. A blessing, or maybe a farewell, and then placed the blade into a carved stone near the temple entrance, where it stood tall as a monument, not to death, but to choice. Crowds gathered not to worship, but to witness, and in the center of them Zilla stood with no crown, no armor, only her voice, and she told them of her father, of the lies they once believed, of the moment she gave the sword to a human, and watched everything they knew begin to shift. She told them of courage that asks for nothing, of strength that carries the weak, and of love that hides in trust between strangers who refuse to give up on each other. And when she finished, she stepped down and let the people decide what to do with the world now left in their hands. And they chose to build not in the image of old empires, but in the shape of shared stories and shared scars across the stars. The message spread through ancient channels, through quiet signals, through the whispers of traders and explorers, that peace had taken root on a world once cursed by endless blood. Lee helped raise walls, but also plant seeds. He walked beside soldiers and farmers alike, taught children how to swing wooden sticks, not as weapons, but as dances, and each night he sat by the fire with Zilla, telling pieces of the journey, sometimes with laughter, sometimes in silence, sometimes with tears. One evening, as the stars gathered above and the wind carried songs from the village, a child approached holding a stick shaped like a blade, and asked, "Is it true the sword chose you?" And Eli smiled and said, "The sword chose everyone who chooses to protect instead of destroy." And the child asked, "Will it choose me too?" And Eli nodded and said, "If you carry it with honor in your heart, then it already has time past, not as an enemy, but as a companion." Seasons changed, trees grew where ash once lay, and the story of the blade became legend, not myth, not forgotten, but lived every day in how people treated one another, in how leaders asked before they commanded, in how no one kneeled unless it was to lift another. The temple remained not as a shrine, but as a school, a place where all who wished to learn could enter, regardless of name or blood. And on the highest wall, carved in clean stone, were the words "He is chosen, not by birth, but by heart." Beside it, rested the hilt of the sword, untouched, yet never alone. And far away on a quiet hill, Eli stood once more, watching the stars, listening to the world breathe around him. Zilla joined him, their hands touching, not in ceremony, not in farewell, but in peace. And when she asked, "Are you still the blade bearer?" he answered, "Not anymore." And she said, "Neither am I." Together they walked down the hill as two souls, who once carried the weight of war, and now carried the light of what comes after. And behind them the wind passed over the sword like a whisper that promised the galaxy would remember not the war, not the blood, but the choice that changed everything.